All right. Now, I'm going to have you kind of set that aside for a second. We're going to come back to it and use it. But I want to introduce to you a tool that will help you understand a little better about your emotions, where they come from, and how to actually change them. This tool is called the Path to Action. But to introduce it, I want to share a fictional story I call the parable of the 16-year-old daughter. How many of you ever had a 16-year-old daughter? Raise your hand. Wow. Okay. Over half or so. Yeah. Okay. Now, I want you to consider this situation. You're a loving father, and you're at the hospital, and your wife is there, and she gives birth to this beautiful baby girl, and you're both so happy. It's your first child, and you're so excited, and you're holding this baby girl in your arms, and you realize, and it hits you one day, this little girl's going to grow up, and she's going to start dating, and boys might get involved, or she might start getting involved with people and dating, and so you realize, oh my gosh, I need to prepare her ASAP for that day. Okay, he decided, this father, that you had to be 16 in your household before you could start dating. And so he said, I have 16 years to prepare her and all the other kids that come around for that day when they start dating, because I want them to make good decisions, no questions asked, right? So he created 3 rules that he felt like would be really helpful and make sure that they stay in line. And these are the 3 rules he created and taught them and made sure they understood. And the first rule was, you always have to be home by curfew. No questions asked, okay? The second rule was they weren't allowed to get involved in alcohol or drugs or any illicit substances whatsoever. And the third rule, she was very particular about her relationship with boys, and so he said the third rule was you always have to have 2 feet on the ground, okay? Vertical is the key, all right? So that's rule number 3, all right? Rule number 3. So, home by curfew, not getting involved in bad substances, 2 feet on the ground. So, as she's growing up, he's teaching her these rules and making sure she understands them, she can repeat them back. It's the law in the house. So that dreadful day comes and she turns 16. And she gets asked out by a young man at school. And he comes to pick her up. What do you think the father realizes about this young man and the rules? He doesn't know the rules. So what does a reasonable, rational, decent father do? He explains the rules, right? And some people say with his gun in his hand, right? That's what it is. He explains the rules to the young man, sits him down and says, here are the rules, you understand? Repeat them back. Okay, great, you can take my daughter out. So they go out on their date, and the father had decided 11:30 was curfew that evening. Okay, first rule, right? 11:30. So they go out on their date, and they're having a good time, and about 11:15 or so, where do you think the father is? Yeah, he's waiting near the front door. He's anticipating her coming home. 11:30 rolls around, and she's not home. Right, so we're saying, we've seen this before, right? Okay, she's not home. 11:45 rolls around, 15 minutes after curfew, no daughter, and let me remind you, no phone call either, okay? 12 o'clock rolls around, no daughter, no phone call. 12:15, and he sees her pull up in the car and start to come to the door. He goes to welcome her, okay? He goes to welcome her. Yeah, okay? He opens the door, and she walks in, and he's almost knocked over by the unmistakable smell of alcohol all over her. Ooh, he is fired up. He's angry. He turns to her and says, you are in huge trouble. You don't understand how much trouble you're in. And she says, but Daddy, he says, don't put Daddy in me. I don't want to hear this excuse. I don't want to hear anything. Go to your room right now. You're grounded for the next forever. Go to your room. I don't want to talk to you. Okay? She goes to her room. Later that night, he and his wife are walking to their bedroom, and they pass her bedroom and hear her crying, whimpering, and the father feels justified because he says, you know what, accountability is the most important thing in my household. She needs to understand the rules. Okay? I want you and I to kind of break apart this father's experience using this path to action that I mentioned to you. Make sure this actually works. The path to action is 4 steps that lead you and I to our behavior. We see and hear, we tell ourselves a story, we feel a certain emotion, then we act. I want to think about the father's experience here. It's 11:30, it's curfew time. What is the father seeing, hearing, noticing that's significant to the story? The daughter is not home. Okay, 11:30, she's absent, she's not at the house. 12:15 rolls around. What is the father seeing, hearing, noticing? Okay, there's no phone call. And at 12:15, what does he see? She walks into the house, and she smells like alcohol. Now, I'm going to say something really bold here. I'm going to suggest that it is not the fact that she wasn't home at 11:30 and that she smelled like alcohol that actually makes him feel angry. Okay? Let's go back a little bit here. She shows up at 12:15. She walks in the door. She's late. She smells like alcohol. What's the assumption, conclusion that he's come to about what he's seeing here? She was drinking. She might have done. She broke a bunch of rules. She broke the first two at least. I don't know about the third. Right? She's broken rules. She doesn't care about them. How does he feel because of those assumptions he's coming to? Betrayed. Violated, betrayed, probably a little hurt. 16 years. I've taught her, right? And this is how he feels. And then drives what behavior? How does he act? He grounds her, yells her, doesn't listen to her, sends her right to her room. Once again, I'm going to suggest here it is not what you're seeing and hearing that drives how you feel. How you feel and your emotions, whether happy or sad, are not a function of what you're seeing and hearing. They're a function of the story you tell yourself about what you're seeing and hearing. It is not that the daughter wasn't home at 11:30 that actually has him feeling angry. What has him feeling angry? Yeah, which is? For 16 years, and she doesn't care. She's breaking the rules deliberately. Even deeper, it is not that he smells alcohol all over her that really actually has him angry. It's not that. What has him angry? He thinks she actually drank it. He thinks she actually drank it. He's not angry because she smells like alcohol. He's not angry because she's walking in late. It's because he thinks she did it deliberately, that she actually drank the alcohol and broke the rules and doesn't care, which drives that feeling of frustration, anger, betrayal. He yells at her and doesn't listen to her. This is a bold, bold thing to consider, but I'm going to suggest that there are two big mistakes you and I make when we tell a story. You know, this is just a part of the way you and I work. We see something, we put it through a filter, it creates an emotion, positive or negative, and then we act accordingly. You'll always tell a story, but this is where you and I go wrong. In the absence of data, in the absence of facts, what do you and I have a tendency to do? We make it up, right? We make it up. And how do we usually make it up? Positive? Yeah, you're like, what, Justin? No, right? I'm going to do that. Yeah, in our favor. This is actually David Bohm, who's considered in many ways the father of dialogue, said, in the absence of data, you and I make it up in the worst possible ways. So that's the first big mistake we make, is in the absence of data, we make it up. And the second is when we pretend or we believe that our stories are facts, and then we feel and we act accordingly. And we often don't catch ourselves till it's way too late. I want you to consider this story with the father and the daughter. The next morning, the daughter comes down, eyes all red, crying all night. She comes to her father and she wants to explain herself. And probably against his better judgment, he allows her to, right? Okay? And he says, okay, well, what's your side? And she says, we went on our date last night and everything was going fine. We went to go grab a bite to eat. We saw a movie and it was going great. And as we were headed back, my date said, do you mind if we stop by a friend's house? She said, sure, I know those folks. I don't care. I know those guys. That's not a big deal. Let's stop by. So they stop by these friends of theirs' home. They go into the basement and they're just hanging out, having fun. And then all of a sudden she starts to realize more and more people showing up. And this is going from a little get-together to kind of a big party. And the third or fourth keg starts to roll in and she goes, I want to go home. So she turns to her date and says, can you take me home? And he says, no, come on, it's not a big deal. Let's just hang out. We're having a good time. He says, just get over it. It's okay. She said, listen, I'm not into this. I just want to go home. And he says, come on, have fun, loosen up. She says, no. She gets a little more firm. No, I'm done. Take me home. He says, forget about it. You're a prude. You can get your own ride home. So she walks out of the basement, goes over to the side of the road, picks up her cell phone, and calls home. Unbeknownst to the mother and father, the younger daughter is on the line chatting it up with her friends. So the older daughter can't get through to talk to her family. So she calls a friend, and then another friend, another friend. She finally gets through to one of her friends who says, sure, I'd be happy to come get you, but I'm at work, and I get off around midnight. I'll come pick you up and take you home. She says, okay. So she's sitting there on the side of the road, waiting for her friend to come pick her up. And this young man and his genius friends come out of the basement. And they start to give her a little hard time. What's wrong? Why do you want to hang out with us? Are you too good for us? Okay. What are you fearful of? What are you worried about? You got to get beer all over you? And pour beer on her head, all over her body. Oh, she is so frustrated. I can't believe this. My first date, and this is what happens. 12 o'clock rolls around. Her friend comes to pick her up. She's soaked. She gets home 15 minutes later, 12:15, just in time for her father to get here, right? To get here on his path to action. How do you think the father's feeling now? About this big, right? About this big, okay? And what are the costs of this? Trust, right? That's a big one. I'm sure he was paying for that emotionally and probably literally for months after that, right? A couple extra trips to the mall, right? Okay. Now, I was sharing this example with a group a couple of years ago, and a woman came up to me at a break and she says, "You missed a part of the story." And I said, "What do you mean?" She says, "All teenagers are liars." Okay?